Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 22nd of February. Today, we will talk about the operational situation in the Avdeevka direction in more detail, in the Zaporozhye direction. A lot of interesting information has appeared in the news background. Well, we'll start with the Lyman direction. So, like yesterday, today, we receive information that the high pace of hostilities continues. Attacks continue in the area of the Krugloy beam, according to reports in the direction of the settlement of Terny. So the Russian troops attacked. We talked about this once about a week ago, that they would most likely try to advance just to a small landing, and use it to further move in the direction of the Thorns. It means that fighting is going on, including in the area of Yar Laptev. Fighting continues. There are a number of messages from Russian military commanders too, I would say a lot of disinformation lately, which is aimed just the same at undermining the fighting spirit of the armed forces of Ukraine, well, from Avdeevka of course. Also, assault actions have an important impact in victory. But, at the same time, we see that there are statements that Russian troops have come close to the Thorns. This is not true. The fighting is going on, but the situation is complicated. It is difficult, because now we need to add that the enemy, as we have already said, is transferring tactical aviation, which was previously involved in the Avdeevka direction, and specifically along Avdeevka to neighboring areas. This is the Kurikovka direction, the South Donetsk direction, and the Lyman direction itself is also seriously suffering from Russian aerial bombs now. So yes, a bet is being made. The situation here is not rosy, I will say it as it is, but also not what they claim. The fighting continues within the gray zone. Well, now actually they are coming. As of today, we do not record any significant changes in the Bakhmut direction. There are still active hostilities in the area of the Popovsky Forest, where the pressure goes both to the west and to the south, in the directions of west-south, and also east of Ivanovo. Here, with varying success, and here we will talk in a little more detail, because it means the first point. It is not only necessary to say that the attacks are coming from the Popovsky Forest in the southern direction, but also from the Kromov area. Russian troops are also trying to advance in the western direction, north of the river, that is north of the Stavka passes, then north rivers, and try to get as close as possible to one of the landings, that is at least to attack it from the north, from the Popovsky Forest, from Kromov. At the same time, this gives them the opportunity to disperse the forces of the armed forces of Ukraine, which are involved just the same in Ivanovskoye, because east of Ivanovskoye, already to the south, everything south of the river, is located at the delivery helmet. There is also pressure from the enemy. It goes not only at the delivery helmet, but also the routes are attacked from the former airfield. There are also a number of attacks in the western direction, and we record counterattacks from the IFU. Therefore, very serious fighting continues in the direction of Ivanovo. It is enough, let's say, that large forces are now using Russian troops, despite the fact that, well, not the best weather conditions I would say, for the introduction of offensive actions, due to the sufficiently effective work of aerial reconnaissance and aerial bombs. But the enemy also has advanced intelligence and bombers, so we have a number of difficulties with this. Well, here's the situation. There are battles taking place now within the gray zone. We are moving with you to the Avdeevka direction. There are small refinements and vectors here, so we'll talk for him. Let's start with the clarifications just the same. So, first of all, from Avdeevsky as Sohim, the enemy began to press. You and I predicted that the pressure efforts in the direction of Stepovoy would try to advance along the forest belts, because then they had a flank attack on Savdivsky as Sohim, and just the same Bradley attacked the Russian positions, then drove into a Sohim as the enemy reported. And there was nothing he could do about it. Now there is a vector of attacks on Orlovka, in the direction of Orlovka, apparently, and in the direction of Lastokin. So, it was possible to take two positions. They were within the gray zone under the control of the Russian troops. This is a crossroads and those structures Then they are trying to advance. Now it is reconnaissance by combat along the forest belts, we will conditionally speak, in the direction of Orlovka. But it is unlikely that the forces they have now used are for storming Orlovka. Most likely, it will be a typical one, because they will try to hit the standard one from several directions, align the front line, and only then pull up and attack further with a wider coverage. But this is my vision. Let's look at the situation. To a depth of up to 200 meters of the enemy's advance, the situation looks approximately as follows. Again, these are conventions, because the attacks continue, the fighting continues, including fighting in the direction of Swallow. We have said that they are attacking along the section of the road, about 0542, making attempts to improve the tactical situation. And here we see one feature. We talked 4 forest belts, one to the north, the other to the south of the one that they occupied, on vector A. There is also from Avdeevka as Sohim, that is, here the enemy will try again with a wider coverage, as we predicted, to attack Lastocken. Now it is possible to restrain, today, it is possible to restrain Russian troops, but based on the fact that they are attacking Avdeevka as a Sohim, that is using it as a fortified area, and actually transferring additional forces there, this suggests that there will be pressure. Well, now we are talking about Swallows on a typical, but in general these are Burdik, Orlovka, Semenovka, that is, they will try to line the front line along this section. But we are talking about this for a long time, for the fact that the enemy conducts what attacks where, the vector of attacks, and what is in their plans, that is, a typical parable Orlovka. This is the situation we have in the Avdeevka direction. There were also a number of statements on May Day. The fighting continues, we do not record any significant changes. The enemy is attacking in small infantry groups so far, that is, there are attacks from 4 to 10 people there. But at the same time there is support, attacks with the support of armored vehicles, there are attacks of armored vehicles. Exclusively where one tank works there, in conjunction with aerial reconnaissance and so on and so on. In other words, so far, no serious offensive actions have been taken. Pervomeyskaya Nevelskaya, and the beam, along the beam, but, at the same time, there is a concentration of forces. Most likely they will increase the pressure, but now they are expecting, well in my opinion, I will always talk about it, weather conditions. As I have said over the past few months, and we have seen, as soon as the weather conditions for aerial reconnaissance deteriorate, the enemy immediately goes on the attack, so most likely they are waiting for the moment. We turn to the Kurikovsky direction. There is a lot to talk about here, and very much, and probably, unfortunately, rather than fortunately. We'll start with Krasnogorovka. Yes, it is from the city of Krasnogorovka. This means that there are a number of attacks from the Russian troops in the northern direction. Not the trunk of the Trudovskaya mine is already been, namely the Stavkov Cascade and the river. We have said that they most likely, the Russian troops will try to level the front line, and, due to the natural border, they will be able to release some of their troops and use them on other troops. Today we see attacks. A gray zone has been added, and one of the forest belts has moved to the gray zone, attacks in this direction. Well, here, I would say that they will try to put the squeeze on the trunk of the Trudovskaya mine completely, because there are battles with varying success. As you remember, they periodically manage to knock out Russian troops. Periodically they knock out our troops. In general, it pulls Alkai as they say. Here is such a situation with varying success. But if they can advance along several forest belts, take a number of positions, yes, then naturally they will be able to align the front line then along the trunk of the veins. But this again, I don't think it's a short-term issue, it's rather a medium-term one, if they continue assault operations in this area. In the medium term, I mean. So this is the first moment. The second point is that periodically there are attacks along the forest belts, again in the direction of one of the stakes, and in Georgievka itself, in its eastern, or as they say in the northeastern part, the one that is located north of the Georgievka stake. This is one moment. Now we turn to the second point, this is promotion. It means that the Russian troops stormed the suburban village of Harvest, were able to advance along the suburban village of Harvest, were able to advance west of Marinka, align the front line along one of the roads. Well, now they are going. Today, the assault operations are continuing both in the suburban village of Harvest and south of it. Here is an advance on a front section up to 2 and 3 kilometers wide to a depth of 520 meters. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. Well, as we said, the enemy attacks with a wide coverage. In principle, we said on previous broadcasts a week or two ago that his goal was field reservoirs, and a week ago we focused on the neighboring field where there was already an attack west of Marenka, that is, his attack vector. Well, actually, he managed to achieve alignment and capture of one of the field reservoirs. Now, the vector of his attacks does not change, but only increases on the contrary. That is, a garden partnership, a field reservoir, and a number of attacks that are distracting, including the DRU. Reconnaissance is conducted by combat on this section of the front. This is the first moment, the second or rather moment. The third one is a victory. The front line has been leveled here, refinements have been added. So according to the situation for yesterday, the situation for today. On a site up to 900 meters wide, the depth was up to 300 meters deep. This is more than the clarifications that we still had yesterday. They planted their flag yesterday, as you remember. Well, yesterday there were also a number of promotions. Now there are both stabilization measures on the part of the enemy, and the transfer of additional forces, as well as assault actions also on this sector of the front. In other words, they attack here with the widest possible coverage. And not only do we say everything that is south of the Georgievsky Stavka, as we have said before, from the Garden Association to victory, but here we will speak from the positions of the southern Krasnogorovka to victory. That is, the widest possible coverage. The goal, of course, is to disperse the AFU forces as much as possible, to reduce the effectiveness of artillery strikes. Well, and due to the superiority in the personnel of artillery and tactical aviation, to achieve success. There is such a moment. We proceed further to Novomikhailovka. There has also been a lot of information about Novomikhailovka over the past 24 hours. We said yesterday on the evening broadcast that the situation in the eastern part along the southern two streets remains to be clarified. Well, I said that it would take about 24 hours to more or less see the picture. Today we state that the situation remains under clarification, because the high pace of hostilities on the part of the armed forces of Ukraine remains. We see counterattacks taking place, but the enemy does not give up trying to improve the tactical situation. That is, then, the Russian troops are still pressing in the direction of the industrial zone, due to which they want to pull up forces from the south. They also concentrate. There is also a concentration of some armored vehicles. It's not so much, but it is there. In other words, the enemy will only increase the pressure in the near future, as far as it is possible for him. And at the same time, Novomikhailovka cannot now be considered as a separate section of the South Donetsk sector of the front, because it means there are also a number of attacks south of victory. We talked to you once about the Garden Association, located north of the Novomikhailovsky headquarters. In other words, one of the goals, do not forget, that the Russian command had, was to break through to the south, in order to take under at least partial fire control a section of the supply road to Novomikhailovka. Therefore, now the enemy is pressing, and in this direction, south of victory, it is possible to restrain for the most part, but, if we previously talked about coverage, let's say, relatively average coverage, the Russian troops attacked in the direction of Pereskoviivka, now this coverage is increasing, it is becoming wider. Therefore, it is also a dangerous situation. Well, in general that's it. We proceed further to the Zaporozhye section of the work front. There is also a lot of misinformation on it, as well as on the Thorns, the Yampolovka, that is, as well as on the Lyman direction. So, we will start first with the information, then with the correction that occurred on the map. There are a number of reports from Russian military enlistment officers that they allegedly managed to get through to the work center. It is specifically stated that the fighting is going on at the school. Here it is actually. They allegedly made their way from the south. Well, the first one is misinformation. That is, the fact that Russian troops entered the western part, at least in 2 sections. We have stated this with you, we have added a gray zone. Then there were shots, first of all, of the APU counterattacks, and secondly, of the capture. That is, the APU regained control over the western part of the work. But that was a few days ago. It is important to make this remark here. The second point is that there was a counterattack, and it was possible to dislodge the Russian troops from the fortified area south of Rabatin. This is also a fact. The second point. The third point is that they continue their assault operations, although the intensity at work itself has been reduced, as we said yesterday. But in general, it remains high along the so-called Putin ledge, and in general in the direction. Because there are attacks, we have also talked with you, so the enemy is attacking us here too.